In today's video, we're going to go through how to create a GitHub organization job in Jenkins. Are you new here? If you are, welcome. And if you are new here, you don't know who I am. My name is Darren Pope, and I'm a developer advocate for CloudBees. You may have seen previous videos where I walked you through how to create a multi-branch pipeline with GitHub. We're going to take it one step further today, and we're going to take a look at the GitHub organization job type. If you're unaware of what this job type is, this is much like a multi-branch pipeline job, except it's much, much bigger. Much like a multi-branch pipeline is a folder of pipeline jobs, a GitHub organization job type is a folder of multi-branch jobs. If you step back and think about it, if I create a GitHub organization job and I point it at the organization within GitHub, whether that's github.com or GitHub Enterprise, and if everybody follows certain rules, convention over configuration, then your job as a Jenkins administrator is greatly simplified. So let's recap where we are starting from today. I have a Jenkins controller that is running 2.263.4. I have an agent connected to that controller with a label of Linux. And I also have an ngrok tunnel running so I can receive webhooks from github.com. Also today, unlike previous videos, I have two repositories that we're working with today. They both start with the name micro. I have a micro 1 repository and a micro 2 repository. At this point, the only thing that both repositories have is a README, and that's all that we're going to need for this example today. If you've watched the previous videos about multi-branch pipeline with GitHub, you might want to skip over these next couple of sections so you can follow the timecodes down below in the description. If you haven't watched it, you're going to need to watch this section. Even if you have watched it in the past with multi-branch, you might want to watch this maybe at 2 speed just to refresh what is going on. Also, there are knowledge base articles down below in the description in case you have any questions about what is going on in today's video. The first thing that we need to do is create a GitHub app. So to do that, we'll go to our GitHub profile page, click on Developer Settings. We'll land on GitHub Apps. Let's click on Create a New, or it doesn't say Create, but New GitHub App. Let's give it a name. The name for our app is going to be named Jenkins GitHub Darren Pope. We'll paste that in right there. We have to give it a homepage URL. I'm just going to give it my organization homepage URL. And then under webhook, because I am going to use webhooks in order to trigger off a lot of the changes that are occurring within my controller, my webhook URL is going to be my ngrok URL, which I'm going to grab here. And I have to also include GitHub webhook. So let's make sure all that looks good, except for the double slash. Now that looks good. Okay, so up to this point, we give it a name, a homepage URL, and a webhook that ends in GitHub-webhook. We'll leave SSL verification turned on because I have a good certificate through ngrok. Now let's go ahead and set our repository permissions. Administration, we need read-only. Checks, we need read and write. Contents, read-only. Metadata, read-only, which is already selected for us. Pull requests, I want read-only. And commit statuses, I want read and write. Now, as I said before, I am going to go ahead and allow GitHub to send me webhooks, number one, but I'm also going to set up my controller to manage webhooks for me. So I'm going to say webhooks read and write. Okay, let's go ahead and scroll down some more. Under organization permissions, we do not need to make any changes there. They are all no access. For user permissions, again, no changes, all no access. Based on the permissions for the repositories that you selected, there are a set of events that showed up down here under Subscribe to Events. So for the events we want to subscribe to, check Run, check Suite, Pull Request, Push, and Repository. Let's go through that one more time. Check Run, check Suite, Pull Request, Push, and Repository. We're also going to set it up to where this app can only be installed on this account. So it's only going to be associated with the Darren Pope account. Let's go ahead and click on Create GitHub App. And if parts of that weren't clear to you, go review the documentation below and it takes you through more step-by-step how to do these settings. Now we've landed on our roughly the detail page for Jenkins GitHub Darren Pope. Go ahead and scroll down. And we're going to the section that is called Generate a Private Key. So I'm going to click on Generate a Private Key. And I am going to save this file. And that has now been saved locally on my machine. We're going to need this private key to use as part of our credential within our controller. However, we cannot use the key as it is. And this is where you're going to need to refer to the documentation or take really close notes as we're going through this. What we're going to do is go over to my downloads directory. And what we're going to do is run the following command. So the command is this OpenSSL command with a pkcs8 and a few other switches along the way. My file name is going to be Jenkins. Whoops, I probably did not have. So that is the key file that we just downloaded. I'm going to change this, well, not necessarily change it, but I'm going to set up an out file called converted GitHub app.pem, and we're also including a no crypt switch on the end. So OpenSSL, some commands, some switches. We have an in file, which was the private key file we downloaded or was downloaded to us. We're turning it into a different format. So we're giving it a different name and then no crypt. Let's hit enter. So now we have a converted file that was created at 1409, which is what time it is right now. Before we leave our GitHub app, we need to make one more change. So what we're going to do is we need to install the application within our organization. So we're still on our details page. We need to click on Install App, or you can also, well, we can see here we must generate a private key, so we just did that. Let's refresh this page. Just do a straight up refresh, see what happens. Yep, so it's all good now. But now we need to install the application. So let's click on Install Application. Remember that we said this application is only good for the Darren Pope organization. So I'm going to click on Install. And it gives you these options. I can either install this on my account, so it applies to all repositories, meaning everything that currently exists and anything in the future, or I only want to select certain repositories. Now this is the decision that you need to make. In my case, I have over 200 repositories that are within my Darren Pope organization. I do not want this GitHub app to have control or have access to any of those, at least from the permissions that we've set up. So I'm only going to select certain repositories. And the two repositories that I want to select are Micro 1 and Micro 2. So there's Micro 1. And I can say Micro 2. Whoops, if I can spell. Micro 2. In your team, in your company, in your organization, you may have multiple GitHub organizations that are scoped to certain teams. You may have a single organization that has thousands of repositories. So you want to be very careful in how you're setting up this GitHub app, and that's also going to carry over into how we create our job. So for right now, the only thing that we're going to do is we're going to allow this GitHub app to have the permissions to only these two repositories. And you can see the effective permissions against these repositories. So let's click on Install. And now we can see that everything is set up the way we want. Now that we've gone down this path, in case we ever wanted to add more repositories, remember, I selected repositories to go along with this app. We would go back to Install App, click on the gear, and within the gear, that's where we would add our extra repositories. Or if at some point you had cleaned up your GitHub organization to only have the repositories in it that you need, then you could go ahead and switch back over to all repositories. Now that we've finished configuring our GitHub app, let's go over to our controller and set up the credentials. So let's go to our controller, manage Jenkins, manage credentials, click on global. Let's add a credential. We're going to change the kind to GitHub app. For the ID, I am going to name it the same as my GitHub app. You can name it whatever you want. I'm naming it so I can look inside my credential here and map it back against what is in GitHub. I'm going to do the same thing for the description. For app ID, we need to come back over, click on developer settings, click on the app, and the app ID right here at the top of the page. So in my case, it's 104239. And for the key, that is going to be our converted key that we created using OpenSSL. So let me cat converted, and I will copy this private key. Tab out of that, and then let's click on Test Connection. And if everything works correctly, we should receive this message, success, remaining rate limit. It may say 5,000, 4,999, somewhere in that ballpark is what is the number that you should be seeing. That's at least for github.com. You may see different numbers if you're using GitHub Enterprise. Let's click on OK. So now we see our credential set up. Now that we have our credentials set up, let's go ahead and create the GitHub organization job. We'll click on Dashboard. We will click on New Item. I'm going to enter an item name just called Darren Pope. I'm naming it the same as my organization within GitHub. Again, you can name it whatever you want. You'll see in a few moments that the name of this job doesn't really matter. We're going to click on GitHub Organization and click OK. So what we can see here is we have an API endpoint of api.github.com. because we are integrating with a organization on github.com, this is the correct API endpoint. If you're using GitHub Enterprise, you will have had to have set up a GitHub Enterprise entry over in Manage Jenkins Configure System so that it would show up here as an option. Let's click on Credentials and select our GitHub App credentials. We can see that the GitHub App verified with a remaining rate limit of 4999. The owner is the owner or the ID of the organization. In my case, my organization ID is Darren Pope, so I'm going to leave that as is. Typically, I would just start with the behaviors that exist and come for default, which are discover branches and discover pull requests, one for origin and one for forks. But you may remember that our GitHub app only applies to two repositories, Micro 1 and Micro 2. So in my case today, I also want to add in a filter for the repositories. What you'll see here at the top is a repositories section within this dropdown. There's a repositories, there's a within repository, there's general. We're focusing right now on the filter by name under repositories. Now note, there is also a filter by name under within repository. That's not what we're doing right now. We are doing filter by name with wildcards under repositories. And in my case, I only want the two the two repositories that start with micro. Said differently, any repository that starts with micro will be included in this job. Let's go ahead and click on Save. And what's happening right now is it is making an API call to GitHub. And here are all the different repositories, but note that it's ignoring all of them except for Micro 1 and Micro 2. The reasons why all of those were being ignored is because of that filter by name that we just added for filtering out the repositories. So the only two we care about right now are Micro 1 and Micro 2. Now let's take a look at this real quick before we take a different look at what happened. We can see that it found a remote branch of main, but it did not find a Jenkins file on that repository on the main branch. Same thing for Micro 2. It found the main branch, but no Jenkins file found. And that's okay, because if you think back to the beginning, we only had a README in both Micro 1 and in Micro 2. Before we leave this page, I want you to notice one more thing. Look at the breadcrumb. Notice that the breadcrumb now has the organization name. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. So we can see from the view of the GitHub organization job, it pulled in the logo, the icon from GitHub. It gave me the full description name or the full human name. And then it also shows the folder name. Remember what I talked about in the introduction. Much like a multi-branch job is a folder of pipeline jobs, a GitHub organization job is a folder of multi-branch jobs. So let's get these repositories showing up in our job. In order for these repositories to start showing up within this job, we need to add a Jenkins file to those repositories. Let's take a look at how this works. So there's our basic configuration. And here we have a project recognizer. And what this is telling us is anytime I find a Jenkins file, this repository will be picked up. And in fact, as you can see here underneath the ad, the only option we have is pipeline Jenkinsfile. We will revisit this in a few moments, but for right now, we're just going to have just the one. And just because, I'm going to go ahead and click on Save. Now let's flip over to our shell and let's go back over to our micro1 repository. We are on our main branch. And let me grab a Jenkins file that we are going to use. So I'm going to say vi Jenkinsfile, and I'm going to paste in a very simple Jenkins file. I have a pipeline agent label Linux. Again, we have an agent connected to our controller that has a label of Linux. And then we're just saying hello from Jenkinsfile. This will become more clear in a few moments. Let's go ahead and click on Save. And then what we're going to do is take that file and get it pushed up to GitHub. So we'll get add, we'll get commit. So add Jenkinsfile. And then we are going to get push. Okay. Now that we've done that, let's go back over here. I'm just going to click on my name, and now we can see that micro1 has been found. If we click into micro1, you're going to see that we have the main branch because that's where the Jenkins file exists. We only have a single branch, and the Jenkins file exists on the branch. So let's think about this again for a second. Darren Pope is a folder. That's a special type of folder, but it's a folder nonetheless of multi-branch jobs. Note the icon here. When I click into the multi-branch job, then we also now have a folder of pipeline jobs that are associated to branches. If we take a look at main, and we take a look at the output, we can see that this was triggered based on a branch index. And then we have our hello from Jenkinsfile, which was the contents of our Jenkinsfile. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to create a new branch in micro1. So let's do a get checkout, or actually let's do this. Let's do a get pull. Yep, we're on main, so let's do a get checkout -b. We'll call it fix-123. And now what we're going to do is we're going to push that up to GitHub. Again, no changes to the branch. We're just creating a new branch. Let's see what happens now. If we refresh micro1, we can now see that fix-123 is there. And it's being built due to the push event to branch fix-123. And we have hello from Jenkinsfile. Again, all good, exactly what we expect to have. Now I want to make a change to the Jenkins file that is within the fix-123 branch. So we are on fix-123. Let's edit our Jenkins file, and we are going to add 2 new stages. And let me grab those here real quick. So what we have here is the Jenkins file. This stage, the hello stage, will apply to all branches. The second stage will only apply to branches that start with fix-, which in our case, we have a fix-123. And the final stage is for PRs. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be making a pull request from fix-123 into main in a few moments. And we can do something different just for PR builds. Let's go ahead and save this. And now we want to add it. And I'm going to commit my change. Okay, and we are going to push this up. What we're going to see here, if I click on micro 1, momentarily we should see Fix 123 has now gone into a pending mode. And as it starts to run here, there we go. There was a push event. Here's our hello from Jenkinsfile. We catted out our README, which was our fix dash step. And we can see that the stage for PR was skipped because fix dash is not the same as PR dash. So far, so good. We have our main branch, our fix branch, and we have no pull request as of yet. Let's go back over to GitHub and let's create a pull request. So we're in micro 1. We can compare and create a pull request. We can see here that we're merging from Fix 123 into main, and the updated Jenkins file are the 2 changes that we just made, or the 2 stages that we just added. Let's go ahead and create a pull request. But we're not going to merge it just yet. Let's go back over to our controller. And if I click on micro 1, we can see now that we still have our main and Fix 123 branches, but we now have a pull request that exists, and that's pull request 4. If we take a look at pull request 4, we can see that PR4 was opened. The hello output, we're skipping the fix dash, and then we have the stage. This only runs for the PRs. So right now we have a main branch, a Fix 123 branch, and a pull request. So now let's go ahead and merge this pull request. We'll go back over to GitHub. We will scroll down and click on Merge Pull Request and confirm merge. Now once the merge completed, the way I have my repository set up within GitHub is to automatically delete the branches once they are merged. So Fix 123 has now been deleted. Let's go back over to our controller, click on micro 1, and what we're going to see is that Fix 123 is now obsolete. That's what the strike through represents. And we can also see that the pull requests, PR4, is also obsolete. If we click on main, we can see it's still running and should be finishing momentarily. We have our hello from Jenkinsfile, and then we have stage for fix was skipped and stage for PR was skipped. So all of our changes that we had in Fix 123 through the pull request are now living inside of the main branch. If we click back on micro, we could wait for a while to have these branches cleaned up, but let's go ahead and click on Scan Repository now, and that will clean up the branches for this repository. So we can see all we have left is main on branches, and the PR4 is now gone. Okay, we spent some time in micro 1. Let's go over to micro 2 and make some changes there so you can see how this works. Now remember, when we set up our GitHub Organization job type, we said we only want to bring in repositories that start with micro. In our case, we have a micro 1 and we have a micro 2. Micro 2 currently does not have a Jenkins file in its file system. So let's make a change so we can have a Jenkins file there. However, we're going to name it a little different. Let's go over to micro 2. So let's pull up this. Let's go over to micro 2. And we are going to create a file named Jenkinsfile -m2. Now you're thinking, Darren, wait, what are you doing? It'll become apparent in a few moments. Let's grab a Jenkins file that is M2. And in fact, the contents of it say as much. It says hello from Jenkinsfile-M2. If you think back to the other Jenkins file that we started with earlier today, it was hello from Jenkinsfile. So just go with me here a little bit. Let's go ahead and save this. And now let's do a git add Jenkinsfile M2, git commit -m, added Jenkinsfile M2. And then I am going to push that up. Now, we've added a Jenkins file, although not named Jenkinsfile, but it is a legitimate Jenkins file. It just doesn't have the name of Jenkinsfile. If we click on Darren Pope, we still do not see Micro 2 here. But think back a moment to project recognizers. Let's click on Configure. If we scroll down to our project recognizers, let's add a new project recognizer. It's still a pipeline Jenkins file, but in this case, we're going to say Jenkinsfile-M2. Let's click on Save. As it scans, what we will see, and I clicked away from the scan log just so it's not there, we can now see that Micro 2 showed up. And we can see that the main branch is building. And if we take a look at the output, we can see that it says hello from Jenkinsfile-M2. Because we set up a project recognizer for Jenkinsfile-M2, when it went through to find, when it was doing the scan and was trying to find files, project recognizers, it did not find a Jenkins file, but it did find a Jenkinsfile-M2, and the job was able to create the Micro 2 multibranch job underneath the GitHub organization. But let's say this wasn't communicated very well within your organization, and somebody just created a -M2, but at a certain point, it's like, oh, you know what? I really want to use a Jenkins file, but I'm going to leave the M2 file in there as well. This could cause some confusion, and we're going to walk through one of the ways you could solve that now. What we're going to do is we are going to make a copy of our M2 Jenkins file and clean it up to look like the other Jenkins file. So I'm just going to do a copy of Jenkinsfile-M2 to Jenkinsfile. Whoops. And I am going to edit Jenkinsfile. And I am going to get rid of the -M2. So if we look here, in the repository, we have a Jenkins file and a Jenkinsfile-M2. So now that we've created this Jenkins file, what do you think is going to happen? Is the Jenkins file going to run and render, or is it going to be the Jenkinsfile-M2 that's going to run and render? Let's see. So let's take a look at the status. Okay, so let's add Jenkins file, because nothing will happen if we don't add it. We'll commit it. And we're going to push this to main. So now we have pushed to main for Micro 2. If I click on main again, we can see that 2 is pending. Wait for it to warm up. And 2's done. If we scroll down, it still says hello from Jenkinsfile-M2. And here's why. We have not had another scan of the organization done yet to pick up that the Jenkins file now exists inside of the micro2 repository. So let's go back to the org level. I'm going to say scan organization now. Give it just a second or two. It doesn't take that long, at least with my setup. I'm going to click on micro2. And now I'm going to click on main. Before we actually run this job or do a build now, let's go back and take a look at 2 real quick. We can see here that the Jenkins file that was picked up and ran was the hello from Jenkinsfile M2. Let's go back over to micro2. Excuse me, let's go back to main in micro2 and click on build now. When we take a look at 3, what you're going to see is now we have a hello from Jenkinsfile. So when we rescanned the organization, it found the micro2 repository. It found that it had a Jenkins file in it. So therefore, the Jenkins file is what was going to be run instead of the Jenkinsfile-M2. So let's go back and look at this one more time. Go back to the organization, click on Configure. And what we have 2 project recognizers. In our case, we have a Jenkins file and a Jenkinsfile-M2. Whichever file first matches is going to be the file that will be used from that point forward after that scan to run the job. Just to prove that, what I'm going to do is I am going to reorder the files. So I'm going to use a Jenkinsfile-M2 first. So if a Jenkinsfile-M2 is found, it's going to be used. If that isn't found, then it's going to look for a Jenkins file. If no Jenkins file is found, then the repository will not be found. So I have M2 first, I have just Jenkins file second. Let's click on save. Because of that change, it will do another scan. Let's take a look back at micro2. Let's click on main. Since that was not an initial scan, we need to do a build now. And with 4, what we're going to see is we are now back to hello from Jenkinsfile M2. As a recap, remember, you can have a pipeline job. You can have a multi-branch job, which is effectively a folder of pipeline jobs. In today's video, we learned that a GitHub Organization job is a folder of multi-branch jobs. So now, in a perfect world, if your GitHub organizations were nice and aligned and followed either lines of business or product or however you want to align your repositories, you could create a single job on your controller, point it at that organization, and making sure that you either name things correctly or just grab all of the repositories, your choice. From that point forward, any changes that are made within the repositories with a correctly configured webhook, you will never have to, in theory, go back into your controller to make changes to jobs. From that point forward, you could manage all of your configurations, primarily, within your Git repositories. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach out to us on Twitter at CloudBeesDevs. And before you click away today, could you go ahead and give us a thumbs up on this video? And if you haven't subscribed to CloudBees TV yet, why not? Take a moment, click on the subscribe button, and then ring that bell, and you'll be notified anytime there is new content available on CloudBees TV. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next video.